Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, April 3rd, 2025. This is episode 352, and we're going to talk about white normative gaze. All right, white normative gaze. I heard someone use that expression today, and they used it quite casually, and I thought it was interesting because it was a Christian setting, and I thought it was interesting that he would raise that expression, considering it's more of a liberal kind of term. Anyway, so, what is white normative gaze? It's just basically academic vocabulary to describe something pretty simple, really. It's basically, and I looked up, and this is what AI generated for me. White normative gaze refers to the way whiteness is often positioned as the default, invisible, and neutral norm in society, leading to the marginalization and erasure of non-white perspectives and experiences. Centering whiteness, the white normative gaze assumes that white experiences, perspectives, and standards are the standard. Standards are the standard. And that, or normal, I guess that would be a better way of correcting AI, and that other racial groups are measured against this norm. Marginalization of non-white perspectives. This can lead to the silencing or misrepresentation of non-white voices and narratives, as well as the reinforcement of racist stereotypes. Examples in literature and media: Toni Morrison, for example, discussed the white gaze in literature, highlighting how white authors and audiences often view and depict narratives from a white perspective, often marginalizing non-white narratives and experiences. Impact on education and workplace. The white gaze can also manifest in educational settings and workplaces, where white norms and standards are often prioritized, leading to the marginalization of non-white students and employees. Colorblind ideology. The concept of colorblindness, which suggests that race should be ignored, can actually perpetuate the white gaze by removing differences and assuming that all people have the privilege and opportunity that white people do. Decentering the white gaze, recognizing and challenging the white normative gaze is crucial for creating more inclusive and equitable societies. Well, in terms of describing normative gaze, it's pretty accurate. I mean, it's what I remember when I would have to talk about it all of the time. But okay, if that's what you're going to say, white normative gaze is, then what do you do about it? Okay, that becomes kind of the interesting response to which, there's this sort of standard packaged approach, which doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to resolve much of anything, but instead creates the world that we are looking at now, which is very chaotic, nonsensical, hypocritical, chaotic, unjust, etc. Back in episode 194, I talked about white culture. I forget why that topic came to mind, where, oh, I think I read someone talk about what asking the question, what is white culture, right? And people would just sort of chuckle like, oh, what do you mean? How do you talk about something like that? Because, right? And is there such a thing as white culture? And so I discussed the idea of culture, which is just sort of codified habits, right? That's all culture is. People living in a certain area, basically over time said, this is the way we eat our food. These are the foods that we're going to eat. This is the way we're going to dress because this is the most convenient way to dress given the weather conditions, etc. And so culture, all that is codified habits, right? So over time, there's a negotiation between people, and they come to a conclusion and they say, well, this is the best way to do it. This is the language we're going to speak. This is how we're going to talk to each other, etc., etc. Now, change happens or challenges occur when there's innovation, when someone comes up with a new invention, a new tool, and it revolutionizes society. And now all of those habits that you developed over time, now they're being challenged, right? Hey, now that we're doing things in a different way, then the habits that we've codified, perhaps they have to change as well. Also, when you interact with new people, people who come in from the outside, or you travel, or you're a port, and all of a sudden people are landing in your port from different parts of the world, right? And we see this metropolitan type phenomena all throughout history. Athens was a port city, therefore very liberal. Sparta was landlocked, and so therefore change was very slow. That was a very conservative society. So port cities generally tend to have people from all over the place, and they are bringing with them their codified habits or their culture. And people check each other out and they say, "Oh, I like how they do that. Oh, I like the color of that. Oh, I like how that sits on your body and it is cooler, right? Et cetera, et cetera." And so now you see this interaction, mixing of ideas, of codified habits, and people get to share ideas. Now, conservatives, people who like the old ways, they don't like the change. And so then you have this negotiation once again. I think white culture is just simply a set of behaviors which work best in this society that we call the USA. And that I'm trying to be as broad as possible, right? Because not all white people are the same. Not all white people came from the same part of Europe. I mean, and I remember that student I had who, if you just saw her, you'd think that she was a typical blonde, blue-eyed, California girl, perhaps. But she was from Georgia on the south side of Russia, and she considered herself Asian, right? And so, what is white? Asian? So it's that kind of, right? So even white culture is normalized, right? And so people who want to talk about a white normative gaze, well, they're also declaring that there is such a thing as a white normative gaze. But if we were to, right, and I'm pushing back a little bit against that and to let you know, yeah, there's not really such a thing. It only is a thing because someone decided to write about it, but that the United States has a history of being free. There's a free society. And in that free society, you had to take responsibility for your actions, which meant that you had to work hard if you want to be successful. It's not political connections. It's not, uh, you know, necessarily athletic skill, but how you can parlay, how you can translate whatever talents you have into some sort of success. And so it's about working hard. And that would probably be the old culture of the United States, the culture of America 150 years ago, perhaps. And so there might be confusion between this pathway to success and the desire to hold on to old world cultural codified habits, right? So success in this society, it has to be through innovation, hard work, and profit, right? Nothing else. If your codified habits, if your set of codified habits, aka culture, prevents you from innovating, prevents you from being able to work hard, prevents you from thinking that profit is a good thing, then you probably won't be successful in this country. Now, if that's the reason why some people will say, oh, it's because of the white normative gaze, that's why I'm not successful. Well, then now you get to shift the blame away from yourself, away from your habits, your personal practices, which may, be the real reason you're not successful. But you're just going to say, no, it's because of the color of my skin. Right. And so, in other words, when cultures interact with each other, it becomes an opportunity to weed out bad cultural practice, bad habits, right? So, societies which oppress certain people in their society for whatever reason, tradition, we'll call it, well, if they meet a culture where the people who normally are oppressed are leaders or considered or can be successful in that society, well, then now it's a challenge, right? So you have the traditionalists with full of oppressed people, then trying to double down and protect the way that they've done things. Otherwise, they're going to lose power and status in that culture. But that's the way we want it. We don't want people to protect and promote bad cultural practices. We want people to freely make a decision as to which practices they want to maintain and which practices are going to be weeded out, right? And we can be we can rest assured that bad practices will not lead to success in a free society. Okay, so going back to, so that's what I said about white culture. So if we were to try to understand what this white normative gaze might be, perhaps it's something that has to do with white culture. But all white culture is, if you think about it, is this culture of working hard, taking responsibility, and trying to create value with the work that we are engaging in, right? And that's all it is, really. And it's only in those situations where government comes in and legislates morality, that's when we have a problem. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So otherwise, then we go back and we look at the AI generated explanation of white normative gaze. So it's the responsibility of each individual to come to terms with this. But again, everyone is different, right? So this is what I'm saying. And personally, it works for me, but how it works for anybody else, well, it's up to that person to figure it out. So, in other words, I grew up with racial identity issues, right? I lived under the gaze. I was envious of people who were white, but I can't become white. And so I had to try to work out what was really going on. And the conclusions I came up with, which I shared with you already through my race theory, the libertarian race theory thing, the conclusions I made were unique to me. And so only I was willing to pay the price to do what I thought was the right thing to overcome this normative white gaze. Right. And that was for me. And everyone I tried to talk to to share these ideas with, they didn't want to hear it because it upended the structure in which they were seeking success. They were getting some measure of success. And so if they were to buy into my subjectivity, then they'd have to start all over, right? Everything that they understood which justified all of their life choices went out the window, right? Just a quick example, someone, would talk about the so-called victories that he gained for himself with regard to his family, to his parents. But in my subjectivity, those weren't victories. That was his parents giving up on him, right? Not going to try anymore to try to communicate with my son because he's so boneheaded he refuses to have a conversation with us, right? And that's what would happen, right? And so he, with his subjectivity and the way that he came to terms with the white normative gaze, was that he was victorious, right? And he felt good about that. And he told everyone that's right. But if you change the subjectivity, no, no, no. He wasn't successful. He was a failure, right? He failed to have a relationship with his parents, right? And that was a high priority for me, right? To how do I have a relationship with my parents, right? There was because I looked at all these other families and I said, wow, they can talk to their parents and they have a good time. I talk to my parents and we fight for 2 hours, and I wanted to. So I was trying to figure out what is preventing me from having that experience, and so I realized what that was. I think I'm pretty sure I've talked about it in other episodes. But that other dude refused to accept that subjectivity because it meant that he wasn't victorious at all. And so this white normative gaze is not unlike racialization, right? Categorizing people, right? And so the gaze, the white gaze itself, categorizes us, or we think it's categorizing us in a certain way. And so it's our choice whether we play into the stereotype that's being created for us or we ignore it and continue to live as an individual. Right. So the centering, and so let's go point by point. The centering of white experiences, well, that's for whites, but these are not usually the problems of so-called marginalized people, right? So, in other words, what a lot of my friends complained about, yeah, those were not concerns of mine. I had different concerns. And so all I had to do was recenter the gaze for myself, right? And so I didn't participate in conversations where people were whining and crying about certain things because it had nothing to do with me. But when I was with my family, when I was with people in my church, when I was with the Korean students that I was teaching, uh, there was a rapport. There was an ability to commiserate, to share stories, to be able to say, yeah, 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 I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, let's talk about that. Right. And so all I had to do was say, yeah, okay, well, that's what you want to talk about. That's not what I want to talk about. And so I just removed myself from that situation and found people who needed to hear what I needed, what I had to say. And generally it was young people who were searching themselves. And, most of them didn't agree with me either, but I gave them the means through which they can begin their own personal journey. And that's a tip off as to why people are talking about white normative gaze. They don't want to recenter, right? Because they want to be the center of those conversations, right? It's sort of like why women don't ever try to fight for equality among sewer workers, right? Was what 94% of all sewer workers are men. So why aren't they protesting? Why aren't they demanding that more women be hired as sewer workers? Because women don't want to be sewer workers. And so you can see that this effort of equality or whatever is only in those jobs and areas that they desire, right? And they're usually high profile, well paying uh, positions. And the same is true when it comes to race. I mean, race, gender, class, it's all the same, right? We're just using different terms, right? And so people who complain about being marginalized from certain conversations is they want to be, what's the expression that young kids are using now? Uh, the main character. They want to be the main character of those conversations, but they can't because that's nothing to do with them. And they feel marginalized. Oh, boo-hoo, right? Go find some place where you are the main character. Like that's what I did. It took me a while, but once I started a family, there it was. And so I was able to communicate to my children exactly, and they listened, right? Because they were my kids. And a lot of the racial identity issues that I struggled with, they never had, right? Because I gave them the explanation, right? And so that's kind of what I mean, it's not going to be this instantaneous, oh, you are now going to be the main character of this group of people. No, it takes time, right? It takes time. It takes integrity as well. In the initial description of white normative gaze, it also talked about silencing other perspectives. That can only happen in areas which are unconcerned with it, right? Think about it. If you're at your workplace, I don't want to know about your culture. All I want to know is, are you going to do the work or not, right? Are you going to do the work well? What's the quality of your work? right? Then who cares about the color of the person that's doing the work? Look, even the school where I'm teaching, right? Honestly, I forget what color. I forget that I'm Asian until someone mentions it, right? That's what the way you want it, right? Because it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. What matters is the quality of the work. Are the students learning what they're supposed to be learning? Are they being challenged? Are they able to see multiple perspectives, right? Multiple subjectivities. And yes, I use that language with them too, and trying to hopefully raise the bar of their intellect and their academic future. If their work is unappreciated or their practices are used against the workers, then quit, right? Get another job. Make your own company, right? So bring it instead of doing that, instead of us saying, "Oh, they totally are disrespecting my culture." Well, okay, if that's important to you, then find another company. But instead of doing that, because you like the job too much, you like how much you're getting paid, and so therefore you want the company to change, then you bring in the government, you protest, you legislate morality, you bring in HR, right, human resources, and you force them to abide by your cultural demands, right? All you're going to do is protect the institutions that are engaging in bad practices, and you're going to enforce whiteness, right? Uh, in other words, if there was, in fact, pro-white worker discrimination at that workplace, by legislating morality, by getting the government to pass certain regulations, you are, in fact, protecting pro-white worker discrimination, right? You can reveal if it was truly racial bias, cultural bias, if you start your own rival company and you put them out of business. That's how you do it, right? But no, no one wants to do that, which makes me think that it wasn't racial bias at all. It was just people complaining that their poor work habits was not yielding into a higher pay, right? It's like the literature, right? People are complaining, oh, the perspective of the main character in that book was white. Well, if you don't like it, then write something else where you're the main character, where your racial category is the one that gets to be talked about, right? And it's funny because when people do that, right, when they write themselves in their race or their gender, whatever, then you see a fetishism, right? People start talking about fetishes. Oh, the fetishization, right? Turning into making fetish the focus, which is demonized again. And so it's again, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Because no matter what you do, you're supposed to fail. That way, someone gets to write another book, someone gets tenure over and over and over again. That's why, no matter what you do, what was that? I was having a conversation with someone, and no matter what you do, they're always going to find another complaint because that's the goal. Just complain, right? And now, if you couldn't complain, all you could do is quit or shut up, find another job, start your own company. Well, then everyone's happy. It's funny because the critique of white normative gaze criticized this idea of color blindness. Well, that's actually what we want, right? We want people not to look at the color of our skin, but we want them to look at the skills that we're bringing to the table. Now, on a personal level, like if you're attracted to a certain racial group, well, that's your thing. But I don't know if you want to be hiring people for your company based on your fetish, right? Unless, of course, it contributes to the value of your company. Otherwise, you want to be colorblind. You want to be hiring people according to skill, according to their ability, according to their reliability, according to their integrity, right? And what's really ironic is by talking about the white gaze, you're actually bringing color back into the conversation. Oh my gosh, I'm a little bit too long. So you're doing what you say you don't want to do. So ultimately, when people talk about white normative gaze, All they're doing is they're using a strategy to increase government control over your life with absolutely no benefit to the people who supposedly you are trying to help, right? Because once you bring government into the picture, that's all you get is waste, fraud, and abuse. And so it's up to each of us to figure out how to respond. And if your response is a good response, then you'll see other people say, yeah, yeah, that's the way I'm going to do it too. Right. And so that's why freedom is absolutely important. The freedom to work it out, and then for the people who worked it out to share their ideas. But all this other stuff, particularly that's coming out of the university with regard to white normative gaze, all that is a strategy to increase the size and scope of government. It's that meme again, where they say, "I'm doing it for climate change." Be honest. I'm doing it for climate change to save the planet. Be honest. All right, I'm doing it for communism. Yes, thank you. Right. And so that basically all this is. It's another way to increase the size of government and reduce the freedom of the individual. And that is, in fact, how we resolve all of these little problems that come up in life. I was going to talk about something else, but I'll save it for tomorrow's episode. And I'll talk to you next time.